All right, and welcome to the last part of our embroidery sampler tutorial. So by now you have finished your woven basket weave stitches down here in the raindrop or teardrop section. You've done your chain stitch, star stitches, a woven wagon wheel stitch, satin stitches, and today we are going to do French knots. So I've gone ahead and already done some French knots up here because they do take a while, and I wanted to show you what they look like before we get into how to do them. So we're going to finish off this cloud over here and we're going to get started. Alright, so these are French knots, and as you can see, I've done a few different colors here. Now in our legend in the embroidery sampler, the stitch legend, these two cloud looking shapes are colored in pink for French knots, and on the legend it says that we are using lilac embroidery thread, so I have that here. But if you wanted to create depth and to create this sort of multicolored effect, you can actually use more than one color. Sometimes I like to input colors that are in the rest of the embroidery. Sometimes I want to use colors all by themselves. And they do this really great textured, almost sheepskin woolly appearance. They are just baubles, basically. You're making a bunch of knots together and it kind of looks a little bit mossy. So you can imagine some things that might be really great to embroider using the stitch. Maybe a happy little bush or some rice in a sushi roll. Anything that really has this sort of textured quality. And honestly, you can just use it to even zone out, do some Zen embroidery, and fill a whole space full of French knots of multiple different colors. So I am going to move on to doing this cloud over here. Now I'm going to do it with my lilac embroidery floss because that's what's in the legend. But in addition to my lilac in this area, I also used the mauve that we used for our woven basket weave stitches down here. And I've also used a light purple that I just had lying around, but you can use any colors you like. I'm just going to go ahead and start putting French knots in here with just the lilac thread. Now, for the French knot, you're not going to split your thread into different strands at all. You're actually just going to find an end and thread the entire thickness of this embroidery floss through your needle. That might mean switching to a needle that has a larger eye just because the thread or the floss thickness is a little bit thicker than we would normally work with. But as long as you're using embroidery floss, you should have 6 little threads in one strand. And so I'm going to just pull out a length about as long as my arm. I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to thread my needle. Now, one of the important things to remember is that you want your needle to probably have a little bit of a bigger eye than what you normally use when you're embroidering. Our gold head needles that I was using before are a little bit smaller in the eye, but this one has a bit of a longer eye, and I know it's really hard to see in the video there. But you want to make sure that you can get that whole thickness of thread through your needle, and that's really difficult with a really tiny eye. You don't want to sacrifice any sharpness in your needle, so even though the needle has a big eye, it should still have a very sharp tip because you don't want it to be too dull. But you're going to fold it over and you're going to knot the longer end. The only difference here between this and all of our other stitches is the amount in terms of thickness of floss that we're using. So I'm going to cut off that tail, and just like all my other stitches, I'm going to come up from the back. Now you can start your French knots anywhere because you're going to be filling this whole space. So I'm just going to start over here so that you can see it without any other stitches in the way. So I've knotted my thread and I'm pulling it up through there. So that's a single layer of thread there coming out. Now what's going to happen next is I'm going to do a wrap and I'm going to sink my needle back in, and that's what's going to make that French knot. So I'm actually just going to prop this up and zoom it in so that you can see it better. Alright, so I've put up my work on a bit of a stand here so that you can see it closer to the camera. What you want to do is take your needle and hold it in one hand facing away from all of your work. Now, that's just so that it's facing away from you and pointing at your opposite hand. So you're right-handed, you're pointing it towards your left hand, and you're going to put that needle in front of the tail of thread that's coming out of your work, and you're going to hold on to that thread. So it forms a bit of a loop, but it should be pretty loose considering how much thread you have on your needles so far. So you're holding that and you're holding that. Now you're going to bring that tail of thread forward and under your needle, wrapping it like that. And you're going to do it again. So you're wrapping it twice. So that's what I did there, and I'm going to do it again. So needle's in front of the thread, thread is behind, needle's in your right hand, thread's in your left hand. Pulling the thread towards you and under, and towards you again and also under. Now you've wrapped it twice around your needle, and what you want to do now is hold on to that tail. You don't want to let it go. And it's a little bit of a dance with your hands because you want to hold on to the embroidery floss, hold on to the frame, and hold on to this needle. And you want to bring the tip of that needle over so that it goes back down into the fabric, either right next to or as close as possible, even in the same hole in the fabric as your original tail came out of. And you're going to sink that in. Now when you sink that in, you want to just make sure you're not tangled on any other part of your work there, but you're not letting go at all of this tail. You can let go of the needle once it's in, if it's like nice and taut, but you don't want to let go of this tail. You want to push that needle through, and then you want to bring your hand underneath so you can pull the needle down into your fabric. And that might take a little bit of tugging depending how tight everything is in terms of your fabric weave. But now you're pulling that down, and you see there goes my tail, there goes all the rest of the thread that's on the needle into that loop. Now once it's at that loop point where it's just a little loop in your finger, you can let go, and it's going to pull boop, right into a knot. And that's what we have there, a little French knot. And now you just do that forever until this whole shape is filled. So I'll go ahead and do it again. I'm going to bring up my needle next to my other French knot there, pull it through, now I'm going to take my tail and I'm going to put my needle in front of my thread. I'm holding on to my tail with my left hand, needle with my right hand, wrap it twice, bring that needle back to the starting point, push it in, holding that tail and the frame with my left hand, push that needle all the way down through. Might be a little bit difficult because it's a little thick. There we go. And pulling that loop until there's just a little loop of thread left in my hand, letting go, and pulling it nice and tight. Now I have two French knots next to each other. Now if you wanted to make a smaller French knot, just wrap it once when we're going around the needle there. If you want to make a bigger French knot, wrap it 3 or 4 times. The more you wrap, the bigger the knot. The thicker the thread, the bigger the knot. So you could also wrap more and make a bigger knot, or you can use a thinner embroidery floss or split your embroidery floss and do the same amount of wraps, and you'll still get a smaller French knot. So it's really up to you how you want to do them in terms of colors, but that's the basic method for doing a French knot. Now you're going to go ahead and fill that whole shape. What I like to do is sort of move around and fill it as much as possible, and then if I want to use another color, I'll go in and fill all the gaps with those different colors. If I want to do the same color, I just keep coming up next to all my stitches and radiating around them until the whole shape is filled. But that's basically it. Now, if I flip it over to the back, you can see what I've got going on in the back. So I've got a knot, sorry, a knot where I started my thread, and generally there'll be little stitches. This is what the back of my French knots look like over here. lots of thread just from moving all around the shape. So it can get a little messy back there. But all you want to do to tie off your French knot is to put your needle through one of your stitches on the back and pull it into a loop. And then we're doing the exact same thing that we always do, where we go through that loop and we go through that loop again. We pull it nice and tight. And then you can bury or weave your tail through some other stitches, and I'm just going to weave mine through that stitch over there. Then I'm going to cut my tail, and all that's nice and taut. So on the front, got a couple French knots there, and I'll be adding a whole bunch more to them. And that's it. That's how you do French knots. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off this, and when I come back I'll show you what the whole embroidery looks like when it's fully finished. So this is my finished French knot cluster up here and over here, and that is the completed stitch sampler. So let me just zoom out here, show you it in its entirety. Amazing. So if yours looks sort of like this, that's great. If you've used different colors, it might look a little different, and everyone's stitches look different based on their own tension and how tight they pull their stitches as they're sewing. So don't be worried if yours looks a little different. And also, all of these stitches take time and practice, so the more you do them, the better you get. And you can always add more stitches to this as you learn them, especially if you want to add more different stitches. But now that you've done this, you can actually take your frame off. Whoop. And what you have left is a beautiful embroidery. So you can choose to store your embroidery in any way you like. You can iron out any wrinkles around the edges, you can place it in a frame, you can even turn it into a patch that you can sew onto a garment. But that's it, there you have it. I'm so happy that we went on this journey together and completed this amazing stitch sampler. Stay tuned for more exciting tutorial videos.